Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Congress has reached a big milestone with the Farm Bill. To get us up to speed and to learn what's in store for the rest of the year, here's our Extension Ag Policy Specialist, Amy Hagerman.
Right, well, last week we actually had an agreement in principle out of the conference committee on the Farm Bill, which is really big news for us. This means that the versions of the Farm Bill from the House and the Senate that were passed in the summer and that has been under discussion with this conference committee since September the 5th is finally, they've worked out all the details, they've worked out the differences between the two bills, and we now have a reconciled Farm Bill that's ready to be scored by the Congressional Budget Office, ready to be introduced for a full floor vote in the House and the Senate, and if it passes those two sides, then it goes to the President for signature, and this is really good news.
Let's kind of talk about some of the major parts of the compromise that Oklahomans in particular might be interested in.
Yeah, so a couple of pretty big things came out of this. First is that crop insurance remains really robust. This was something that was called for when they did the listening sessions associated with the Farm Bill prior to writing it, and that remains there for Oklahoma producers who utilize those crop insurance programs. Another thing is that the rest of the commodity farm safety net was actually really strengthened. There's potentially going to be a yield update, which could be good news for our counties that had a lot of drought the last time the yields were set. Also on the conservation side, that was an area where there was some controversy and some pretty big differences between the two versions of the Farm Bill. The House version of the Farm Bill proposed eliminating the Conservation Stewardship Program, but it looks like in the version of the bill coming out of the conference committee that the Conservation Stewardship Program and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program are both going to be available in the coming 5 years. And then finally, one of the areas there was a lot of controversy around were these mandatory work requirements for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. This had caused a lot of division and some delay as they worked out those differences, but it looks like those work requirements are not going to be in this version of the Farm Bill that's going to come out. And that means a couple of different things. One, it means that it's a little bit more of a bipartisan Farm Bill that looks a little more like the Senate version that came out. And it also means that there's a pretty good chance we'll get this Farm Bill passed by the end of the year.
So between now and the end of the year to get that done, what needs to happen? There's quite a bit of work between now and then.
There's quite a bit of work and not very many days between now and then. So the last day of the two congressional sessions are the 13th and the 14th for the House and the Senate. So we need to get this bill introduced probably by early next week at the latest, and it needs to pass both the House and the Senate. And then the President needs to sign it hopefully by the end of December in order to get this in process and to be able to have signups for ARC and PLC and the other programs in 2019.
Well, let's hope they get to that. Some great progress, though. At least there's been that much.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is really good news. This is a nice end of year treat for us.
Exactly. Okay, Amy, thanks for getting us up to speed, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
One of the important decisions that cow-calf operations have to make each year is how many replacement heifers do we save back to put into a breeding season to become replacements for those cows that we eventually either lose or have to cull. Well, there's some data that kind of helps us give a little starting place on making that calculation. If you look at this particular graphic, it comes from the Dickinson Experiment Station up in North Dakota, where they kept track over a 20-year period of time the percentage of cows in that herd by age categories. In other words, if you look over on the left-hand side, you'll see that about 17% of that herd each year, on the average, were those 2-year-olds having their first babies. So that gives us a starting place as to what to expect we need in order to keep our cow herd at about the same number year after year. But when we're selecting and keeping back replacements to go into their first breeding season, we want to keep back more than that to make sure that we have enough to fill the slots that are going to be available in that herd. If we're going to take good care of our replacement heifers, say they're going to gain 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds per head per day on a good growing program, then we probably need only about another 10%, or in this case about 2 to 3 more heifers out of that 17. If we've got a 100 cow herd, only about 2 to 3 more in order to get enough, a high enough percentage of them bred. I'm always going to expect about 10% of our replacement heifers to not breed in that first breeding season, and those are the ones we certainly want to cull anyway. If we're going to grow them well, about 20 heifers in order to make that 17 for this 100 cow herd. However, if we choose to feed these heifers at a lower rate, grow them more slowly, rough them through the winter, so to speak, on a lower ration, then we better expect to keep more in order to have enough of them bred early in the breeding season. Those situations where they're growing at less than 1 pound a day throughout the course of the winter, then I think we better keep another half of the heifer crop, another 50% in other words, in order to make sure we have enough, because we'll have fewer of them cycling going into the breeding season. And so in our 100 cow herd example, then we're looking at keeping another 8 to 9 heifers rather than just 2 or 3 in order to make sure that we've got enough of them that will get bred. And we're letting Mother Nature actually do our heifer selection for us in this way. Those that get bred we keep, those that don't then we have to sell as stocker heifers that are still young enough to go into a feedlot situation. So I think this will help you in terms of deciding how many heifers you're going to keep back and put into a breeding season so that you have that 17% that are actually bred and going to calve at the upcoming calving season each year, and that will help maintain herd size over the long run. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
It's been an interesting season for cull-cow markets, and Derrell, what's been playing into that?
Well, you know, we probably put in a seasonal low here recently. Normally November is the seasonal low, but this year's been unusual because these market, you know, the cull-cow market usually stays strong through the summer, through August, and then starts to drop off in September and October, move into that seasonal low. This year, the market dropped much earlier. Really from May on, cull-cow prices were well below year earlier levels. And so, you know, we didn't really know what to expect for the seasonal low because we got low so early. Right. It did drop a little bit more here in November, and that probably is the low, but it kind of sets the stage then for what to expect as we go forward from here.
I love that phrase, probably the low. What's really been impacting those changes?
Well, you know, there's a couple things I think. Clearly, supply is part of the issue. You know, cull cows go into that, you know, basically that hamburger market, lean trimmings market, and those prices have been low this year. And part of that, I think, is a function of supply. Cow slaughter has been larger this year. We knew beef cow slaughter would be up again as it has the last 3 years. Dairy cow slaughter turned out to be a little bit bigger than expected. So total cow slaughter right now is running about 7% above a year ago, and that's bigger year over year than last year. So supply is part of it. There may be a demand component as well. You know, the ground beef market may be the one aspect of beef that is seeing some competition from pork and poultry. It's not really clear, but you know, we've marveled at how strong beef demand has stayed on in total, but the ground beef market may be seeing more of that sort of dollar menu competition with chicken and other things, and so that may be part of the issue as well.
So here we are, the last month of the calendar year. Are cattle and beef markets kind of putting their foot on the clutch and just kind of coasting on into 2019?
Well, I think we're getting close to that time. We sort of do that, you know, if you look at beef demand and beef buying. All the holiday buying is pretty much in place now, so beef markets are going to kind of coast out the year, see how we move beef, and then we'll sort of pick it up in January. Cattle markets are getting close to that as well, I think, as far as especially feeder cattle markets. We probably don't have quite all of the fall run done yet. We've delayed it a little bit with some of the weather issues we've had this fall. But, by and large, I think we're going to, again, sort of coast out, and then, there'll be folks that'll be saving some calves till after the first of the year for tax reasons or whatever, and we'll see these markets pick up again about mid-January.
Where are we with the overall markets right now in the beginning of December?
Well, I think, we're in pretty good shape, actually. Box beef has been relatively strong, kind of flat here lately, but that was after having strengthened a bit. Fed cattle prices have pushed back up a little bit higher, so we're up around 117, 118 for cash fed cattle prices. Feeder markets are relatively strong, although they've been quite volatile this fall. A little bit up and down. Some of that's due to the volatility in the futures markets. Some of it has really been these weather challenges we've had this fall. Week to week, we've had these cold fronts come through, and that really impacts these markets a little bit. So, but all in all, I'd say we're in pretty good shape at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you much. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Welcome to the weekly Mesonet Weather Report. Wheat grown for forage is one of Oklahoma's most important crops. There are several factors that determine how successful wheat is as a fall forage. The most important is probably planting date. Usually, the earlier you plant, the higher your potential fall forage yields will be. The second important factor would be moisture. This year, lack of moisture has not been a problem. Even with early planted wheat that was adequately watered, many producers have not been happy with the amount of forage produced to date. Temperature is probably next in importance for wheat growth, and this is where we have been struggling. If we look at air temperatures in October, we see that it was about 3 or 4 degrees below normal in most of the wheat growing areas. November was much cooler, with temperatures running 6 or 7 degrees below normal. The first week of December has continued this cooler than normal trend. Soil temperatures understandably follow air temperature trends. If we look at October soil temperatures at a 4-inch depth under sod, we see they were 1 to 2 degrees below normal in the west. In November, they dropped to as much as 6 degrees below normal. There is probably not much time left for wheat to recover for fall forage. However, spring forage and grain yields still look promising at this time. Now here's Gary with more information on rainfall and forecast.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, we're on to December, so I thought I'd give you a quick recap of November and then take a look into the future. Now, obviously, we were colder than normal during November, which is sort of what we've been seeing over the last few months, but we're also much drier than normal, which is a little bit different because August, September, and October were pretty wet. So let's go to the Mesonet maps, see what we have. As we take a look at the November Mesonet totals, we can see much of the western half and even farther into eastern Oklahoma had less than an inch of rain. For November, which is a dry month normally, that's pretty dry. Now, eastern Oklahoma is a little bit better with 1 inch to 2 inches in some cases, and down in far southeast Oklahoma, as much as 3 to 4 inches. But still, that is below normal. As we go on to the November percent of normal rainfall totals, you can see much of the state from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40, maybe up to 50 to 60% of normal, but way too many reds and oranges on that map. In fact, there was no spot in the state that was above normal for the month of November. Again, that's a stark difference from what we've seen from August through October. The outlooks show increased odds of above normal temperatures across the entire state. They're not greatly increased odds, but they are increased a little bit. And then we see increased odds of above normal precipitation as well. So you put that together where we have the current drought situation, and we see from the drought outlook for December, no changes basically where the drought is in northeast Oklahoma, but also no areas of development or intensification as well. So no changes in where the drought is, but no developing drought either. So we can hope for December a little bit more rainfall than what we got in November. We definitely need that across much of the state, but especially up in northeastern Oklahoma where they can eventually knock that drought out. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Now, there have been a few times that my wife and I have been driving down the road and our daughters will be in the back and they'll see a beef cow on the side of the road and they'll say, "Dad, is that where the milk that we drink comes from?" And I'll say, "Well, no, not really, but Dave, why, is there a difference between beef milk and dairy milk?"
Not a lot. Beef cow doesn't produce near as much milk as a dairy cow. You know, a dairy cow is going to produce 6 to 8 gallons of milk a day. A beef cow maybe 2 to 4. As far as composition, a dairy cow's milk is going to contain about 4.8% lactose, and it's very consistent lactose concentration, almost never changes. In that gallon of milk, you'd have about dairy milk, you'd have about 3.4% fat and about 3.4% protein. The only difference in a beef cow milk is that it's more concentrated in fat. It's going to be closer to about 4% fat.
So of all of that, how does the I want to use the word moisture content, but the water amount play into that?
It's mostly water, and that's why those nutrient values sound kind of low, because milk is 87% water. Okay, if you take all the water out, you're left with a pound of powdered milk or concentrated nutrients. So it's 87% water. Now you've got a pound left in that jug that's 37% lactose, 31% fat, and about 26% protein. So you add all those up, and other than the minerals, which would be about 6%, you're right at 100. So it is extremely concentrated in nutrients.
How much input is there to make that same amount of fluid?
You know, milk production is actually, the production of milk itself is actually quite efficient. So for example, to produce this 1 more gallon of milk a day in a beef cow, we think it takes somewhere around 2.5 pounds of high quality grass hay. Well, it's 2.5 pounds of a dry hay to produce 1 pound of the powdered nutrients, right? So not including the water. If you put that on a corn equivalent, so concentrate feed, for example, about 1.25 pounds of corn to produce 1 pound of concentrated nutrients. That's efficient.
Wow.
Okay, now, so the issue isn't the efficiency of milk production itself. The issue is the conversion of pounds of milk produced to calf weight gain. And that's where we run into problems in the beef cattle industry, is particularly, let's say in the summertime, when you have high quality forage, you're kind of swapping more milk and increasing milk intake of the calf and reducing high quality forage intake. That conversion is not as efficient.
Very interesting. Well, and we're out here at the North Range covering this right now. You have an event coming up here in I guess next week.
We do, December 18th. And so we're going to have a field day, and what we're going to focus on is efficiency of feeding hay. We're going to look at different types of hay feeders and actually demonstrate hay waste, and also we're going to have a fencing demonstration.
So the fencing with the swords and all that.
Not that kind of fencing. Electric fencing.
Oh wow! Boy, now there's an Olympic sport. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be interesting.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. And for more information on that event, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu. Over the years, eastern red cedar has moved into what was prairie land, and Laura, the cedars have impacted forage production in those lands.
Yeah, so eastern red cedar is really growing in a lot of areas that were historically grasslands. And so as the amount of cedar increases on a pasture, so say you had 80% cedar, you're going to have less and less understory vegetation growing. So if you did have 80% of your area covered by eastern red cedar, you could expect to grow about a quarter of the forage that you would if you didn't have any cedar growing. So if you're in an area that grows 4,000 or 5,000 pounds per acre, which is pretty typical for central Oklahoma, you could get 1,000 to 1,200 pounds when you have a lot of cedar. Now, if you only had about 40% of your area covered in cedar, you'd still need to cut your stocking rate by about a half, because your forage production would be about half of what you'd expect if you didn't have any cedar. So it can have a huge impact on forage production for livestock producers.
So not only does it impact the actual plant, but cedars are said to take up a lot of water throughout, even during drought times.
Yeah, and so part of what happens is when you have an open grassland and you have cedar that are kind of spaced out, the area between those cedars where there's actually grass growing, those grass plants are more stressed for water because they're competing with a big tree that has a really extensive root system. And so during drought, that competition is even more fierce. And so those plants experience drought even worse than if you didn't have those trees competing with them. And so you can expect that those plants will go dormant more quickly. And when they go dormant, of course, their forage quality drops pretty quickly. So many of our range grasses can have 14, 15, 16% crude protein when they're actively growing. But when they go dormant, it'll drop to 4 or 5%. So it can make huge differences. And when protein supplementation is one of the most expensive parts of livestock production, it's a pretty big deal if your plants start to go dormant earlier than what they could potentially stay actively growing.
How long would it take for quality forage to get back into a former cedar area?
So it really just depends on how much rain you get. You could expect to have some grass growth in the next year, but you probably won't have a really well established grassland for at least 2 growing seasons. Now, if you have a really dry year, that it could take quite a bit longer than that.
And when could that reach stocking rates? I mean, that's kind of a goal for many producers once they evacuate the land of cedars.
Yeah, so what you can do to answer that question is after you've cleared cedar, you can go ahead, if you have cattle in the pasture and you've just cleared part of it, you can go ahead and put in a grazing exclosure. So all you do is get a cattle panel and some T-posts and just exclude a certain area. So you can really start to see how quickly it's recovering. That will allow you to see how quickly the grass recovers when there's absolutely no grazing. If animals are already in the pasture, they're going to be grazing this site regardless. And that will really help you to calculate stocking rates. And if you need more information about how to accurately calculate stocking rates, we have some really great fact sheets about that.
Okay, thank you much, Laura. You're welcome. And for more information on that, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, is here now. Kim, you're cautiously optimistic about wheat prices. Give us an idea why.
Well, I think it all starts with coming into this last marketing year in June and July. We were very low, or very tight stocks of protein in wheat. Milling quality wheat was nearly non-existent. If you look at the production for 2018-19 around the world, it's about 1% less than the use. If you look at the world hard wheat, that's hard red spring and hard red winter wheat production for the major exporters, the production's supposed to be 7% less than the use. And if you look at U.S. hard red winter wheat, production is supposed to be 13% less than use. So if we use more than we produced and we were short of protein coming into the 18-19, then we've got to be short of protein. And we saw a pretty good price move coming into that. Another is if you look at exports, U.S. hard red winter wheat exports are projected to be only 3% less than last year. Now, I think this next WASDE report will probably raise that a little bit, but it'll still probably be in single digit. Right now, our current export sales are 36% below last year. So those sales have got to pick up sometime, and that's probably in the January, February time period. And then another reason is Russian exports. Russian exports are projected to be 16% less than last year. Their current sales and shipments are 20% above last year. So that's got to come to a halt, and I think ours has got to take off. And then you look at Australian wheat production. it's the lowest it's been since 2007.
What was last year's price pattern then?
Well, if you look at last year's price pattern, we came into January about $3.50, $3.60 wheat. By May 1 or mid-May, we were essentially at $5. So we got a big rally, and I think that rally was anticipation of the quality of the 18 crop.
And could the 18-19 price pattern follow the previous year?
It's possible, and I'm expecting it to. That's my cautious optimism there, is that we're going to come in January, February, demand's going to pick up. The foreign markets, especially the Russian, Ukraine wheat, that high quality wheat's not going to be available, and prices. Will we get, from $3.50 a $1.50 price increase? I don't think so, but we could get 75 cents or $1 between January 1 and June 1.
Okay, let's hope so. Kim, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.
You may have noticed recent changes to the format of the nutritional label, but you might not have noticed that there have been changes to the serving size information as well. So why the change? When the nutritional label was created in 1993, the FDA used surveys of food consumption that had been conducted in the 70s and 80s to help establish the serving sizes. However, recent consumer data has shown that people's eating patterns have changed. So to better reflect that reality, the reference amounts used to establish the serving sizes have changed as well. Some serving sizes have gotten larger. For example, ice cream has increased from 1/2 cup to 2/3 cup. However, some serving sizes have gotten smaller. For example, yogurt has decreased from 8 ounces to 6 ounces. Something else to keep in mind is that the changes to the serving size are also influenced by the size of the package. Foods that have been labeled as 1.5 servings before are now required to be labeled as 1 serving because consumers are more likely to eat or drink them in one sitting. For example, both 12-ounce and 20-ounce bottles of soft drink are now required to be labeled as single servings. So the changes to the serving size information are meant to provide consumers with more information about what they're actually eating so that they can make healthier choices. For more information, please visit sunup.okstate.edu or visit fapc.biz or download the FAPC app.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.